On my birthday, my father handed me a velvet box containing a necklace. My husband Julian smirked in front of our entire family and called it some ugly old necklace fit for a thrift store. I stayed silent and slipped it into my purse. But when I woke up the next morning, the necklace had vanished. Before I could even finish searching, my phone rang. It was my father, his voice shaking with panic, telling me to stop looking, grab my daughter and leave immediately because my brother was waiting outside. If you have ever been betrayed by the people who share your blood, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit the like button and subscribe for a story about unearthing the darkest family secrets. The nightmare actually started the night before at an exclusive steakhouse in downtown Atlanta. We were supposed to be celebrating my birthday, but as usual, the evening quickly devolved into a showcase for my older sister Chloe and her husband Preston. Growing up in our affluent African American community, my mother, Evelyn, treated social status like a religion. She practically worshipped the ground. Preston walked on simply because he was a wealthy white investment banker from a prominent Boston family. To her, Preston was the ultimate prize that elevated our family standing at the country club and local charity galas. I sat at the end of the long mahogany table, cutting into my steak, while Julian checked his phone for the fifth time. Julian was a wealth management director obsessed with appearances. He had spent the entire appetizer course bragging about his new luxury car lease, while complaining about the tuition costs for our 5-year-old daughter Zuri. My father, Marcus, quietly slid a worn velvet box across the white tablecloth toward me. He had not spoken much all evening, letting my mother command the room. I opened the box to find a stunning antique necklace. The heavy dark stone glowed. It was beautiful in a raw, unpolished way. Julian leaned over and scoffed loudly, making sure the entire table could hear him. "You are really going to wear that to Preston's Country Club gala next weekend? It is some ugly old necklace. You look like you robbed a thrift store, Maya." The table fell dead silent. Instead of defending me, my mother, Evelyn, took a delicate sip of her wine and sighed. "Julian has a point. Maya, you always insist on being so eccentric. You really should try to look more put together. Look at what Preston just bought Chloe for their anniversary." Chloe proudly extended her wrist, displaying a blindingly bright diamond tennis bracelet. Preston smiled, a smug, self-satisfied grin that made my stomach turn. He wrapped his arm around Chloe and loudly proclaimed that only the best would do for his wife. My mother beamed at them, completely ignoring the fact that my husband had just humiliated me on my birthday. I looked at my father. His jaw was clenched tight and his eyes darted nervously between Julian and Preston, but he said absolutely nothing. He just stared down at his plate. I swallowed the lump in my throat, snapped the velvet box shut and dropped it into my leather purse. Without another word, I had spent my entire life as the family disappointment, the forensic accountant who skipped the elite sorority pledging and refused to play the social climbing games my mother demanded. I was used to their constant insults. They always considered my career choice inferior to joining an established corporate firm. Julian never defended me against their cruel remarks, because he desperately craved their approval and financial backing. He wanted to belong to their exclusive world, more than he wanted to be a supportive, loyal husband to me. The real shock came the following morning. I woke up to the sound of heavy rain hitting our bedroom window. Julian was already dressed in his tailored suit, adjusting his tie in the tall mirror. I reached for my purse on the nightstand to take another look at my father's gift. I opened the leather bag and reached inside. My hand met empty space. I dumped the contents of the purse onto the bed: keys, wallet, lipstick, receipts, but absolutely no heavy velvet box. Panic flared in my chest. I checked the floor, the bathroom, the kitchen counter. "What are you tearing the house apart for?" Julian asked, sounding profoundly annoyed as he watched me frantically check the entryway table. "The necklace my dad gave me is missing," I said, my heart pounding against my ribs. "I put it right here in my bag." Julian rolled his eyes and let out a harsh laugh. "You probably dropped it somewhere. You have always been completely disorganized and mentally unstable. Maya, you cannot even keep track of a worthless piece of junk." Why are you acting so crazy over a rusty chain anyway? I stared at him. I had not taken the purse anywhere else. We drove straight home from the restaurant and went directly to sleep. The only person who could have touched that bag was Julian. He grabbed his briefcase and told me to stop acting hysterical before slamming the front door behind him. Stood frozen in the foyer, processing his blatant gaslighting. He had taken it. I knew deep down, he had taken it. But before I could figure out why, my phone started vibrating violently in my hand. The caller identification showed my father's name. I answered quickly, expecting a standard morning greeting. Instead, my father's voice came through sharp, breathless, and utterly terrified. Maya, listen to me very carefully right now. Stop looking for the necklace. Do not ask Julian about it. Just grab Zuri and leave the house right this second. Your brother Trey is waiting in the car at the corner of your street. Do not pack anything. Just run. Do not look back. I dropped the phone. The screen shattered loudly against the hardwood floor, but I did not care. My father's panicked warning echoed in my ears. Grab Zuri and leave. I sprinted down the hallway toward my 5-year-old daughter's bedroom. My socks slipped on the polished floorboards. I grabbed the handle, but a hand slammed the door shut. I spun around. Julian was standing there. His tailored suit jacket was draped over a large stuffed duffel bag. His charming facade was completely gone. The polished wealth management director my mother adored had vanished. In his place stood a cold, calculating stranger with a vicious glare. "Where do you think you are going?" he asked, stepping closer to me. His voice was low and menacing. "Preston has a major investor dinner tonight. You need to put on a designer dress and play the happy, successful black wife for his rich clients. Do not ruin this for us, Maya." I stared down at the duffel bag. My mind raced, piecing the clues together. The missing necklace, the gaslighting, the packed bag. "You are not going to a work retreat this weekend, are you?" I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of fear and rage. "You were running. You sold my necklace." Julian scoffed and crossed his arms over his chest. "Do not flatter yourself, Maya. That piece of junk would not even cover the interest on what I owe. I needed real capital, and your pristine credit score was the only useful thing you brought into this marriage." I felt the air leave my lungs. "What did you do, Julian?" I took another step forward, trapping me against Zuri's bedroom door. "I did what I had to do for this family. Preston's investment firm is hemorrhaging money. He needed liquidity to keep up appearances at the country club, and I needed to keep my position. You think your mother would accept me if I was broke? You think she would let me sit at her fancy mahogany tables? I pawned that ugly necklace to buy me a few hours of time while the real money transfers clear." "You are insane," I yelled, pushing against his chest. "Let me get my daughter. We are leaving right now." Julian grabbed my wrists with crushing force. "You are not going anywhere, Maya. If you leave now, you will ruin the optics. Preston needs you smiling at that dinner to secure the new fund. If his firm goes down, I go down. And if I go down, I am taking you with me." He squeezed my wrists tighter, making me gasp in pain. "You are going to walk into the bathroom, fix your makeup, and get ready for tonight." I tried to kick him, but he shoved me hard against the doorframe. My head cracked against the wood. My vision blurred for a split second. Before Julian could pin me down, a massive crash echoed through the foyer. The solid oak front door splintered open violently. Heavy footsteps pounded down the hallway. Suddenly, Julian was ripped away from me. My younger brother Trey grabbed Julian by the collar of his expensive dress shirt and hurled him across the corridor. Julian crashed into a console table, sending a decorative vase shattering to the floor. Trey did not hesitate. He tackled Julian, pinning him to the hardwood floor with a brutal punch to the jaw. "Stay away from my sister," Trey snarled, raising his fist again. Julian scrambled backward, blood dripping from his lip. He scrambled toward his duffel bag, but Trey kicked it out of reach. "Maya, grab Zuri and go," Trey shouted over his shoulder. I did not waste a single second. I threw open the bedroom door. Zuri was sitting on her bed, clutching a stuffed animal and looking terrified by the shouting. I scooped her up into my arms, holding her tightly against my chest. "Mommy is right here, sweetie," I whispered, kissing her forehead. "We are going on a quick trip with Uncle Trey." I rushed past the two men grappling on the floor. Trey delivered one final blow to Julian's ribs before springing to his feet and grabbing his keys. If you come after her, I will put you in the hospital, Trey warned Julian. We sprinted out the broken front door and into the pouring rain. Trey's black SUV was idling at the curb. I scrambled into the back seat, pulling Zuri onto my lap and buckling the seatbelt around us both. Trey threw himself into the driver's seat and slammed on the gas pedal. The tires screeched against the wet asphalt as we sped away from the suburban prison I had called home. I held my daughter tightly, trying to steady my racing heart. Trey, what is going on? I asked, my voice shaking uncontrollably. Why did Dad call me like that? Why is Julian packing his bags? Trey kept his eyes on the rearview mirror, checking to see if we were being followed. He reached over to the passenger seat and grabbed a thick manila folder. Without looking away from the road, he tossed the folder backward onto my lap. Open it, Trey commanded, gripping the steering wheel tightly. I opened the damp cardboard flap. Inside were satellite imaging printouts, bank statements, and a map covered in red markers. Dad did not give you a cheap antique, Maya, Trey said, his voice grim. That necklace had a military-grade micro GPS tracker hidden inside the clasp. He knew Julian was desperate, and he knew Julian would try to pawn it. My hands shook as I looked at the tracking data. Where is it, Trey? I asked. Trey took a sharp turn onto the highway, pushing the engine to its limit. It just pinged an hour ago, Trey said. It is sitting in the headquarters of the deadliest loan shark cartel in Chicago. Julian and Preston do not just owe the bank money, Maya, they owe the mob. The black tires screamed loudly as Trey whipped the SUV into a narrow alleyway behind an abandoned textile factory. He killed the headlights, instantly plunging us into total darkness. My heart hammered violently against my ribs like a trapped bird. Zuri whimpered in the back seat, burying her face into my shoulder. I hushed her, gently rubbing her back while my mind raced to process my brother's words. The mob. My polished husband was in debt to a Chicago crime syndicate. Trey grabbed a heavy set of keys from the center console. We are going inside, he said, his voice tight with adrenaline. Keep her quiet, Maya. Do not turn on your flashlight. We hurried through a rusted door and climbed 3 flights of stairs. Trey unlocked a steel door, revealing a sparse, windowless apartment. It smelled of dust and stale coffee. A single bulb illuminated a folding table and a server setup. This was Trey's off-the-books workspace. My parents always dismissed my brother as a paranoid theorist who wasted his computer science degree. Right now, that paranoia was keeping us alive. Put Zuri in the back room, Trey instructed, tossing his jacket onto a chair. There is a tablet with cartoons on the bed. Keep the volume low. I settled Zuri into the bedroom, wrapping her in a blanket and handing her the glowing screen. Once she was distracted, I marched back into the main room. The shock was wearing off, replaced by a cold, mechanical fury. I am a federally licensed forensic accountant. I track missing millions for Fortune 500 companies. If Julian hid dirty money, I was going to find every cent. Give me a laptop, I demanded, pulling out a chair. Trey slid a laptop across the table. It is entirely encrypted. What are you looking for? A back door I installed 6 months ago, I said, my fingers flying across the keys. Julian asked me to audit his personal accounts before tax season. I noticed strange wire transfers to shell companies in the Cayman Islands. When I asked him about it, he threw a fit. He told me to stay out of his business and stop acting like a suspicious wife. I let it go to keep the peace. But I left a tracking script in his private cloud just in case. I hit enter. The screen flashed green before financial documents flooded the display. The Thornton Blackwood Investment Group portfolio materialized in front of us. This was the elite firm Julian and Preston managed. The firm my mother constantly bragged about to her social circle. My eyes scanned the ledgers, the balance sheets, and the offshore routing numbers. The numbers did not make sense. The incoming client funds were not being invested in the tech startups and real estate portfolios listed in their brochures. Maya, what am I looking at? Trey asked, leaning over my shoulder. I felt the blood drain from my face. It is a lie, I whispered, my voice cracking. All of it. The firm, the wealth. Preston's Mayflower money. It is a massive Ponzi scheme, Trey. They are using new investor capital to pay off the old clients. They are completely bankrupt. I clicked through another set of encrypted folders. My anger flared hotter with every document I decrypted. The losses were astronomical, but one specific ledger caught my eye. A separate shadow account labeled with Preston's initials. I traced the routing numbers through 3 offshore banks until the final destination appeared on the screen. It was a holding company known to the FBI as a front for a Chicago cartel. Preston did not just lose money in the market, I said, pointing at the screen. He owes $5 million to the cartel. He borrowed their money to cover failing margins and lost it all. Trey slammed his fist onto the table, making the laptop jump. And Julian pawned your antique necklace to pay them off. That piece of jewelry was worth $50,000 max. It barely covers the interest. I did not just pawn the necklace, I said, my voice dropping. My eyes locked onto a recent withdrawal from our joint accounts. I clicked the file open and my stomach lurched. Julian had completely liquidated Zuri's college fund. $200,000 I saved since the day she was born gone in a single keystroke. He drained my personal savings account. He cashed out my retirement portfolio. Every single dollar I worked for over the past 10 years was wiped out yesterday afternoon. That bastard, Trey hissed, pacing the small room. He sold out his own daughter to save his white brother-in-law's skin. Mom and Dad are going to lose their minds when they find out Preston is a fraud. Before I could respond, my cell phone buzzed violently on the table. The screen lit up with a high-priority notification from my primary bank. I snatched the phone, my hands shaking as I read the text message. Dear Maya Thornton, congratulations. Your commercial loan application for $2 million has been successfully approved, and the funds have been dispersed to your designated account. I stared at the glowing screen, unable to comprehend the words. I had not applied for a commercial loan. I had not signed any paperwork. Maya, what is it? Trey asked, stopping his pacing. I looked up at my brother, my vision swimming with a mixture of terror and absolute rage. Julian did not just steal my money, Trey. He stole my identity. He used my federal credentials and my pristine credit score to forge a $2 million loan in my name. Trey's eyes widened in horror as the realization hit him. He gave the money to the cartel, Trey said, piecing it together. He is not just paying Preston's debt, Maya. He is framing you for the wire fraud. When the feds and the mob come looking for their money, they are going to come looking for you. The cramped safe house felt like a shrinking box. I stared at the glowing screen. The massive weight of the $2 million loan crushed my chest. Julian had weaponized my spotless financial record to shield his crimes. Before Trey could formulate a plan to counter the fraud, my cell phone vibrated violently against the metal table. The caller identification flashed brightly. It was my mother. Trey lunged forward and grabbed my wrist. Do not answer that, Maya. Julian definitely called her first. She is just going to run interference for him. I shook my head and pulled my arm away from his firm grip. I need to know exactly what narrative he is spinning. I swiped the green icon and put the phone on speaker, bracing myself for the sound of my mother's voice. I expected frantic questions. I expected a mother terrified for the safety of her daughter and granddaughter. Instead, a shrill, furious shriek echoed from the phone speaker. Maya Evangeline Thornton, you bring that child back to her father right this instant. Evelyn screamed, her voice vibrating with absolute rage. Julian just called us from the police station. He told us you had a complete mental breakdown, packed a bag, and kidnapped Zuri. Have you lost your entire mind? I blinked. The sheer audacity of the lie temporarily stole my breath. A mental breakdown. Mom, Julian is lying to you. He is involved in a massive financial crime. Trey had to physically pull him off me. We had to run because Julian tried to hurt me. Evelyn cut me off with a sharp, derisive laugh. Stop lying, Maya. Julian is a respected wealth management director. He provides a beautiful life for you, and this is how you repay him. By throwing a psychotic fit right before your sister's Alpha Kappa, Alpha sorority induction weekend. Chloe has elite guests flying in from Boston, and now we have to deal with police officers asking questions about our family. You are ruining our image. My blood ran cold. I looked at Trey, who was shaking his head in disgust. She did not care that I was attacked. She did not care that Zuri was displaced. She only cared about Chloe's sorority induction and the family image. Image, I yelled, gripping the edge of the table. Mom, Preston and Julian are running a Ponzi scheme. The charity funds, the investment portfolios, all of it is completely fake. Preston owes a Chicago drug cartel $5 million. Julian forged my signature on a $2 million loan to pay off a mob debt. They are criminals. The line went dead silent. For 5 seconds, the only sound in the room was the hum of the computer servers. I waited for the gasp of horror. I waited for my mother to ask if I was safe from the cartel. I waited for her to denounce Preston. Then Evelyn spoke, her tone chillingly calm and calculated. You think you are the only one who knows how to read a balance sheet, Maya. The air left my lungs. The room started to spin. You knew, I whispered, horror washing over me. You knew Preston's firm was failing. Of course I knew, Evelyn snapped back, dropping any pretense of maternal affection. Preston came to me months ago when the liquidity dried up. Do you have any idea what Preston brings to this family? He comes from Mayflower money, Maya. His family name opens doors in Atlanta that black families like ours spend generations trying to unlock. He elevated your sister. He elevated all of us to the country club elite. We cannot afford a public bankruptcy scandal. I felt a physical sickness rising in my throat. So you let Julian steal my necklace. You let him frame me for a cartel debt. Evelyn did not hesitate. Your credit score is pristine. You have no public profile to protect. If Julian has to leverage your name to secure capital and save Preston's firm, then you let him do it. It is your duty to protect this family, Maya. We gave you everything and you have always been so selfish. You will take the blame, you will return Zuri to her father, and you will keep your mouth shut. Trey slammed his hand against the wall, swearing loudly. He could not believe what he was hearing from our own mother. I stood frozen. 34 years of seeking my mother's approval, of trying to be the good daughter, shattered in an instant. She was willing to feed me to a drug cartel and federal investigators just to keep her country club membership and protect Chloe's perfect white husband. She wanted me to be the sacrificial lamb so her golden child could continue playing pretend. Maya, are you listening to me? Evelyn demanded, her voice shrill again. You will fix this right now. If you ruin Chloe's big weekend, I will personally make sure you never see your daughter again. A profound calm washed over me. A cold, calculating forensic accountant took over. I looked at the laptop screen. I still had root access to Julian's private cloud. I had the routing numbers to every single offshore account, shell company, and hidden trust fund Julian and Preston had built. They thought I was just a naive wife. They forgot I was a licensed auditor who knew exactly how to track and destroy dirty money. I picked up the phone. I did not yell. I did not cry. Duty, I asked with a dark smirk forming on my lips. Just watch this. I dropped the phone onto the table. I did not hang up. I wanted her to hear the keystrokes. I pulled the keyboard toward me. I selected the master directory containing Julian's entire financial network. With a few rapid commands, I initiated a mass security override. I highlighted the Cayman Island accounts, the Swiss holding funds, and the domestic shell corporations. I smiled coldly and firmly hit enter. The screen flashed a brilliant crimson red. A cascade of lock icons cascaded down the digital ledger. Every offshore account, every hidden trust fund, every domestic shell corporation tied to Julian and Preston froze instantly. I listened to my mother screaming my name through the phone speaker, but her voice was quickly drowned out by panicked alerts echoing from Trey's servers. The money was locked. Nobody could move a single cent without my biometric authorization. I finally reached over and ended the call, cutting off my mother's frantic shrieks. The financial bloodbath had officially begun. 2 days later, the crisp autumn air felt deceptively calm as I pulled my rental sedan up to the wrought iron gates of Zuri's private academy. Trey had secured a vehicle for me untraceable to our joint accounts. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. The past 48 hours had been a blur of federal filings, server encryptions, and absolute silence from Julian. The silence worried me more than his shouting. Julian never retreated unless he was preparing a massive offensive strike. I parked the car and walked up the manicured stone pathway toward the administrative building. The elite academy catered exclusively to Atlanta's upper echelon. Normally, the pickup line was a parade of luxury SUVs. Today, something was wrong. A heavy knot formed in my stomach as I approached the heavy oak doors. Standing in front of the main office were 2 uniformed police officers. Between them stood Julian, He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, his hair immaculately groomed his posture, projecting the ultimate image of a concerned, wealthy father. My daughter Zuri stood behind the reception desk crying softly while the school principal awkwardly tried to comfort her. Julian spotted me first. His eyes locked onto mine and a sickeningly triumphant smile flashed across his face before he instantly morphed his expression into a mask of deep distress. He turned to the taller officer and pointed a trembling finger in my direction. "That is her," Julian said, his voice dripping with manufactured heartbreak. "That is my wife. Please, officer, just keep her away from my daughter. She is completely unstable." The two officers immediately stepped forward, blocking my path to the office. The taller officer placed his hand on his utility belt. Ma'am, I need you to step back right now," the officer commanded. I ignored him and tried to look past his broad shoulders. "Zuri," I called out, keeping my voice steady. "Mommy is right here, sweetie. Grab your backpack, we are going home." "You are not going anywhere with her," Julian announced, stepping out from behind the officers. He pulled a thick stack of legal documents from his leather briefcase and waved them in the air. "I have an emergency ex parte custody order signed by a superior court judge this morning. You have been legally stripped of all parental rights, Maya. You cannot come within 500 feet of my daughter." I stared at the paperwork, my blood boiling. An emergency custody order required proving immediate physical danger. "What lies did you tell a judge, Julian?" I demanded, stepping forward. The second officer immediately stepped into my personal space, raising his hand. "Ma'am, if you take one more step toward Mr. Thornton, I will place you under arrest for violating a direct court order. Your husband has provided documented proof of your recent psychological break. He claims you kidnapped your daughter 2 days ago and drained the family bank accounts. He is lying." I shot back, my voice echoing off the stone walls of the school courtyard. "I did not drain any accounts. I froze them because he is involved in federal wire fraud." Julian let out a loud, theatrical sigh, rubbing his temples, as if dealing with a psychiatric patient. "Listen to her, officers. She is completely delusional. She has been having these paranoid episodes for months. She thinks everyone is out to get her. My business partner Preston even tried to get her into a private facility last week. 2 days ago, she completely snapped. She hacked into my investment firm's servers and illegally locked down millions of dollars of client funds. She essentially stole from my clients to fund her little runaway fantasy." The principal gasped from the doorway. The taller officer glared at me, pulling a pair of metal handcuffs from his belt. "Miss Thornton, you are currently trespassing and violating a direct court order. You are going to turn around and walk back to your vehicle peacefully, or I am taking you into custody right now for grand larceny and child endangerment. Mr. Thornton has the financial records proving you hijacked his corporate accounts. You need serious psychiatric help." Julian smirked, hiding his arrogant grin behind his hand as he pretended to wipe away a tear. He thought he had me cornered. He thought his polished corporate facade and his white business partners' connections would automatically make the police blindly obey his narrative. He relied on the age-old tactic of painting the black woman as hysterical and unhinged. I did not panic. I reached into my tailored blazer and pulled out a crisp manila envelope. I calmly removed a single sheet of heavy cardstock stamped with a glowing blue federal seal. I stepped up to the officer holding the handcuffs and pressed the document firmly against his chest. "I am not a crazy wife, officer," I stated loudly. "I am a federally licensed forensic auditor. I initiated a lawful asset freeze because this man standing behind you is currently the primary target of an active federal investigation for massive wire fraud." The officer read the seal and instantly lowered his handcuffs, stepping away from Julian. Julian leaned in close as I walked past him to grab Zuri. "You think a piece of paper saves you," he whispered. "My lawyer is destroying you in family court tomorrow morning." I locked eyes with him. "Bring your best lawyer. You will absolutely need him." The heavy mahogany doors of Cook County Family Court swung shut, sealing me inside a sterile judicial arena. Julian sat at the petitioner table, projecting the aura of a deeply wounded father. But he did not bring his usual high-priced corporate bulldog. Sitting beside him, arranging her legal pads with predatory precision, was my older sister Chloe. She wore a tailored crimson suit, her Alpha Kappa Alpha pin gleaming on her lapel. She looked every bit the elite managing partner my mother constantly bragged about. I sat at the respondent table next to Arthur Sterling, a mild-mannered family law attorney Trey had scrambled to hire last night. He looked thoroughly exhausted before the hearing even began. Judge Harrison, a stern man with no patience for theatrics, called the emergency custody hearing to order. Chloe stood immediately, launching into a vicious and highly rehearsed opening statement. Your Honor, my client is seeking emergency full custody to protect his 5-year-old daughter from a mother experiencing a severe untreated psychotic break. Chloe stated, her voice echoing with manufactured sorrow. Maya Thornton has a documented history of severe jealousy and irrational behavior. As the underachiever of a highly successful family, she has always harbored deep-seated resentment. 2 days ago, that resentment morphed into dangerous delusions. She kidnapped her own daughter and used her background in accounting to maliciously freeze my client's legitimate business assets, claiming he was part of a cartel. It is a textbook paranoid delusion. I gripped my pen so hard the plastic cracked. Chloe was brilliantly weaponizing my family dynamics to destroy my credibility. She was painting my federal audit as a symptom of mental illness. We call our first witness, Chloe announced smoothly. Evelyn Thornton. My mother walked down the aisle, smoothing her designer skirt. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. It was the biggest lie of them. Taking the stand. Evelyn produced a lace handkerchief and dabbed at her perfectly dry eyes. Mrs. Thornton, Chloe asked gently, can you describe your daughter's mental state over the past few years? Evelyn let out a shaky breath, delivering an Oscar-worthy performance. It breaks my heart to say this, but Maya has been unstable since childhood. She was always prone to these wild, destructive fantasies whenever she felt inadequate. Julian is a wonderful provider, a loving father. But Maya could not handle the pressure of being married to a successful man. When she showed up at my house ranting about mobsters and wire fraud, I was terrified for my granddaughter. Maya needs a psychiatric facility, not custody. My lawyer, Mr. Sterling, stood up for cross-examination. He fumbled with his notes, his voice lacking any real authority. Mrs. Thornton, are you aware that your daughter is a licensed federal auditor? He asked weakly. Chloe slammed her hand on the table. Objection, Your Honor. Relevance. Her professional licenses do not immunize her from a mental breakdown. Sustained, Judge Harrison ruled, glaring at Sterling. Move it along, counselor. Sterling stuttered, trying to pivot to the frozen accounts, but Chloe aggressively objected to every poorly phrased question. She ran circles around him, citing case law, and twisting his words until he simply gave up and sat back down. He wiped sweat from his forehead, looking entirely defeated. Judge Harrison leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. He looked directly at me, and his expression was grim. Miss Thornton freezing corporate assets without a judicial order based on alleged cartel involvement is highly erratic behavior. The court must prioritize the safety of the minor child. I am deeply concerned by your mother's testimony regarding your psychological stability. Julian leaned back in his chair. A smug, triumphant grin spread across his face. He looked at me, his eyes gleaming with malicious victory. He knew the system favored wealth and polished appearances. He had the high-powered lawyer sister and the weeping, respectable mother. I was just the hysterical woman acting out. Sterling leaned close to my ear. Maya, the judge is going to grant the emergency order, he whispered frantically. We need to mitigate the damage. I am going to propose supervised weekend visitation. It is the best we can hope for right now. I stared at the man who was supposed to be defending my right to protect my daughter. He was surrendering to a financial terrorist and a gaslighting family. Supervised visitation. I would have to ask a court-appointed monitor for permission to hug my own child while Julian used her as leverage to keep me quiet about the Ponzi scheme. A cold, absolute clarity washed over me. I was done relying on weak men. I was done letting my mother and sister control the narrative. I picked up my briefcase and snapped the brass latches open. I am not accepting supervised visitation, I told Sterling, my voice hard and flat. You are fired. Before Sterling could object, I pushed my chair back and stood up. The heavy wooden legs scraped loudly against the marble floor, echoing through the silent courtroom. Everyone stared at me. Chloe narrowed her eyes, sensing a shift in the atmosphere. Julian's smug grin faltered slightly. Your Honor, I stated, my voice projecting clearly across the room. I am officially dismissing Mr. Sterling as my legal counsel effective immediately. I request permission to proceed pro se and represent myself in this hearing. Judge Harrison raised a skeptical eyebrow. Miss Thornton, representing yourself in a complex custody dispute is highly inadvisable. Given the allegations regarding your mental state, this outburst does not help your case. I stepped out from behind the heavy respondent table and approached the bench. I appreciate your concern, Your Honor, but the only delusion in this courtroom is the one being spun by my family. They claim my husband is a devoted and highly respected businessman. Your Honor, I would like to submit Exhibit A, the defendant's drug screening and gambling ledgers from the Bellagio. The judge stared at the thick stack of papers I placed on the polished mahogany bench. The courtroom was dead silent. Chloe stood up, her chair screeching against the marble floor. She smoothed her crimson suit jacket and glared at me. Your Honor, my sister is clearly unwell, Chloe stated, her voice dripping with condescension. She is submitting fabricated documents to distract this court from her own criminal behavior. We strongly object to this highly irregular pro se representation. I did not back down. I pulled a certified bank seal from my folder and handed it to the bailiff. These documents are directly subpoenaed from the Bellagio Grand Casino in Las Vegas. Your Honor, I said, maintaining perfect eye contact with the judge. I am a licensed federal auditor. I do not submit forged evidence. I would like to call Julian Thornton to the stand. Judge Harrison reviewed the sealed cover page. He looked at Julian, then back to Chloe. The objection is overruled, Counselor. Mr. Thornton, please take the stand. Julian shot Chloe a nervous glance but quickly regained his arrogant composure. He walked to the witness box, buttoning his expensive suit jacket and reciting his oath with a charming smile. He looked completely relaxed. He thought he could easily outsmart his emotional wife. He was wrong. Mr. Thornton, I began, pacing slowly in front of the witness box. In your sworn affidavit seeking emergency custody, you claim you are a devoted father who provides a stable home environment. You also claim you travel frequently for high-level wealth management conferences. Is that correct? Julian leaned into the microphone. Yes, Maya. I work tirelessly to provide for you and Zuri. My travel schedule is demanding but necessary for our family's financial security. I pulled out a red marker and a calendar printout. Let us talk about that travel schedule. According to your firm's expense reports, you spent exactly 180 days out of the state last year. That is 6 entire months away from your daughter. You told me those trips were for acquiring tech startup investments in Silicon Valley. I was building our portfolio, Julian answered smoothly. I held up Exhibit A. Then please explain to the court why your corporate credit card records show no flights to California. Instead, they show 72 round-trip flights to McCarran International Airport in Nevada. Furthermore, this certified casino ledger shows that during those 180 days, you were occupying a high-roller penthouse at the Bellagio. Julian swallowed hard. His charming smile faltered. I had client meetings in Vegas. It is a major convention hub, Maya. You simply do not understand corporate networking. I slammed the ledger onto the wooden railing of the witness box. Do not patronize me, Julian. Client meetings do not require a daily withdrawal of $50,000 at the baccarat tables. This ledger details $2.4 million in gambling losses over the past 12 months. You were not networking. You were hemorrhaging client funds to feed a severe gambling addiction. And when you ran out of money, you used your position to borrow from a Chicago crime syndicate. Chloe slammed both hands onto the petitioner table. Objection, Your Honor. This is outrageous slander. Maya is presenting completely fabricated financial documents. She printed these off her laptop to frame my client. This is exactly the paranoid delusion we warned you about. She is trying to destroy this family. I spun around to face my sister. The sheer hypocrisy radiating from her crimson suit made my blood boil. I took a slow, deliberate step toward her table. Fabricated, I asked, my voice echoing off the high ceilings. Just like your husband Preston's Harvard degree. The courtroom collectively gasped. My mother let out a strangled shriek from the gallery. Chloe's face turned completely ashen. Her jaw dropped open but no words came out. I turned back to Judge Harrison. Your Honor, 2 days ago I audited the Thornton Blackwood Investment Group. While tracking the missing millions, Julian gambled away. I found a shadow account belonging to Chloe's husband. That account contained a wire transfer of exactly $500,000 sent directly to a university official 4 years ago. Preston did not graduate from Harvard. His family bought his admission and fabricated his transcripts. My sister is perfectly fine with forged documents as long as they protect her country club status. Chloe sank into her chair, looking like she had been physically struck. My mother covered her face with her hands, weeping genuine tears of social humiliation. The polished elite image they valued above my safety was completely shattered on the public record. Judge Harrison adjusted his glasses and spent 5 agonizing minutes reading through the casino ledgers. He examined the federal tracking numbers and the certified banking seals. The silence in the room was deafening. Julian sat frozen in the witness box, sweating profusely. His tailored suit suddenly looked 2 sizes too big. Miss Thornton, Judge Harrison finally said, looking over the rim of his glasses. These documents are comprehensive and federally authenticated. They show a clear and disturbing pattern of severe financial misconduct and gambling addiction by the petitioner. The judge turned his stern gaze toward Julian. Mr. Thornton, you filed an emergency ex parte motion claiming your wife was a danger to your daughter. Yet the evidence before me indicates that you are the one engaging in reckless criminal behavior. You perjured yourself in your sworn affidavit. You have endangered your family's financial and physical security. Julian opened his mouth to speak, but Judge Harrison raised his hand, silencing him instantly. I have heard enough. This court finds the petitioner's claims entirely baseless. The emergency custody order is immediately vacated. Judge Harrison picked up his pen and began signing a new document. Furthermore, based on the compelling evidence of gambling addiction and potential criminal associations, I am granting Maya Thornton sole physical and legal custody of the minor child, Zuri Thornton. Mr. Thornton, your visitation rights are suspended pending a full psychological evaluation and a complete review of these financial records by the state prosecutor's office. I let out a long breath I did not realize I had been holding. The heavy, crushing weight of the past 48 hours lifted from my shoulders. I had won. I had protected my daughter. I am also issuing a temporary restraining order. Judge Harrison continued, his voice booming with absolute finality. Mr. Thornton, you are not to come within 500 feet of Maya or Zuri Thornton. If you violate this order, you will be arrested immediately. Judge Harrison raised his wooden gavel and slammed it down onto the sounding block. The loud crack echoed like a gunshot, sealing Julian's fate. We are adjourned. Julian slumped forward, burying his face in his hands. Chloe refused to look at him, hurriedly packing her legal pads, while our mother rushed out of the gallery to avoid the lingering stares of the court staff. I gathered my forensic reports, feeling a profound sense of empowerment. I had dismantled their lies with cold, hard facts. As I turned to leave the respondent table, the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom slowly pushed open. A tall, broad-shouldered man stepped inside. He wore a crisp military veteran lapel pin on his dark suit jacket. It was my father, Marcus. He had always been the quiet observer in my mother's chaotic world. He stood near the exit, his hands clasped firmly in front of him. His eyes locked onto mine, and he gave me a slow, silent nod of absolute respect. I returned the nod, keeping my expression completely neutral. Marcus Thornton had spent his entire life enabling Evelyn and Chloe, playing the quiet banker while they tore me down. His validation now meant nothing to me. I grabbed my leather briefcase, pushing past the heavy swinging doors, and stepped out into the echoing marble corridor of the courthouse. The air outside the courtroom felt surprisingly thin. My adrenaline was still surging, masking the physical exhaustion of the past 3 days. I needed to get to my rental sedan. I needed to get back to the secure location where Trey was watching Zuri. Before I could take 5 steps, a heavy hand clamped down hard on my shoulder. I spun around, expecting to see Julian making one last desperate attempt at intimidation. Instead, I found myself staring directly at Preston. My sister's husband normally projected the ultimate image of old money restraint. He was a man who wore custom-tailored Brooks Brothers suits, played squash at the country club, and spoke with a carefully cultivated mid-Atlantic drawl. That man was gone. The Preston standing in front of me looked like a cornered animal. His tie was loosened, his collar unbuttoned, and a thin layer of nervous sweat coated his forehead. His eyes were bloodshot, darting frantically up and down the hallway to ensure we were alone. He shoved me forcefully toward an empty alcove near the emergency exit stairwell, blocking my path with his broad frame. "Get your hands off me, Preston," I commanded, keeping my voice dangerously low. I shifted my weight, preparing to scream for the bailiff standing 20 yards away. Preston crowded into my personal space, his white knight upper-class facade dropping completely. The scent of stale gin and desperation rolled off him. "You think you won in there?" he hissed, spittle flying from his lips. "You think exposing Julian magically makes you safe? You have absolutely no idea what you just triggered, Maya. You are playing a game with people who do not care about family court orders." I tightened my grip on my briefcase handle. "Julian is going to jail, Preston. And considering the wire transfers I uncovered, your fake Harvard degree is going to be the least of your legal problems. I will have your investment accounts dismantled by the end of the week." Preston let out a harsh, jagged laugh. It sounded like tearing metal. "You are not dismantling anything," he snarled, "because if you do not unfreeze my offshore accounts right now, I am making a single phone call. Do you understand me? I will make a call and end your life." I stared at him, unfazed by the theatrical threat. "You are pathetic, Preston. A fraud built on my sister's vanity. Move out of my way." He grabbed my arm, squeezing the fabric of my blazer until his knuckles turned white. "The loan sharks have the necklace, Maya." He spat the words out, his chest heaving. His voice trembled with a terrifying mix of triumph and absolute terror. I froze. My stomach plummeted. The vintage diamond heirloom necklace my father had given me on my 18th birthday. It was the only piece of jewelry I had left behind in the wall safe at the house. I had been in too much of a rush grabbing Zuri to open the combination lock. "I watched your face drain." Preston sneered, misinterpreting my silence. "That is right. I took it. I cracked your pathetic little safe yesterday. The Chicago cartel demanded collateral for Julian's debt. That necklace covers our $5 million deficit. They accepted the diamonds, but they know your name now, Maya. They know exactly who you are, and they know you are the one locking down their funds." He leaned in closer, pressing his forearm against the marble wall beside my head, trapping me in the alcove. "Unfreeze my accounts immediately," Preston demanded, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. "Lift the federal hold by midnight. If you refuse, I give them your safe house address. I know exactly where Trey is hiding Zuri. I will hand them the location and let the cartel collect their money directly from your daughter." The corridor went completely silent. The only sound was Preston's ragged breathing. He genuinely thought he held the ultimate trump card. He thought he had outsmarted the federal auditor, using street-level thug tactics. He expected me to crumble, to beg for my daughter's safety, to pull out my laptop and release the frozen millions. Instead, I let out a sharp, genuinely amused laugh. I stepped directly into Preston's personal space, pushing my shoulder against his chest. I did not blink. I did not flinch. "You gave the cartel my necklace to clear your $5 million debt," I asked, my voice echoing loudly in the narrow alcove. Preston smirked, his arrogance returning for a fleeting second. "It was the only asset liquid enough to satisfy them." "You are going to log into those servers right now, Maya." "That is hilarious," I whispered, maintaining brutal eye contact. "Because the vintage diamond necklace my dad gave me was a replica made of cubic zirconia. I sold the real diamonds 3 years ago to fund my independent auditing firm. The real stones have been gone for 36 months." I watched Preston process the words. I watched his brain try to reject the information. "You just handed a drug cartel a piece of glass, Preston," I said, my voice slicing through the air like a scalpel. "You gave dangerous men a worthless prop to settle a $5 million debt. And you think they are going to come after me?" Preston's face drained of all color. His skin turned a sickening shade of gray. His eyes widened in absolute unadulterated horror as the grim reality of his fatal mistake finally clicked into place. His jaw went slack and his shaking hand dropped from my arm. He stumbled backward completely and utterly ruined. The grand ballroom of the opulent downtown hotel hummed with the quiet, steady vibration of generational wealth and carefully curated reputations. It was Friday night, and the annual charity gala was the undisputed crown jewel of Chicago's Black elite social calendar. Chloe and Preston were the evening's hosts, standing near a towering crystal champagne pyramid, like royalty holding court. Despite the absolute terror I had left Preston experiencing in the courthouse stairwell just days earlier, he had managed to paste on a stiff tuxedo-clad smile. He looked pale, and his hands shook slightly, but he was playing his part. My mother Evelyn was in her element. She glided between tables of federal judges, elite surgeons and legacy families wrapped in expensive emerald silk and dripping in borrowed pearls. I watched from the shadows of the mezzanine balcony as she placed a manicured hand on the arm of a prominent state senator, laughing loudly at a joke. "Preston is just brilliant," Evelyn boasted, her voice carrying easily over the soft music of the live string quartet playing in the corner. "His investment firm is expanding globally this quarter, and his philanthropic vision is unmatched. Harvard men simply have a different caliber of ambition, do they not?" The senator nodded politely, completely unaware that the man they were praising owed $5 million to a ruthless Chicago crime syndicate and had bought his Ivy League degree with stolen corporate funds. I stepped out of the shadows and walked toward the grand sweeping staircase leading down to the main floor. I was not wearing my usual conservative auditor suits or the plain clothes they expected of the family underachiever. I wore a custom-tailored midnight blue velvet gown that swept the floor with a dangerous fluid elegance. The fabric moved like liquid, catching the bright light of the massive crystal chandeliers overhead. Beside me stood Trey, looking equally devastating in a razor-sharp black tuxedo. He offered his arm, and I took it, my posture perfectly straight. As we began our slow descent, the muted conversations near the bottom of the staircase began to falter. Heads turned. Whispers rippled through the crowded room like a sudden breeze over still water. The outcast daughter, the supposed hysterical woman who had just stripped Julian of his wealth and his custody rights, was not hiding in shame. I was descending into their elite sanctuary, looking like absolute victory. We reached the thick velvet rope at the entrance to the main ballroom. Two massive private security guards immediately stepped forward, blocking the heavy double doors. They crossed their arms, staring down at us with rehearsed intimidation. "Excuse me, ma'am," the taller guard stated, holding up a thick guest list on a leather clipboard. "Mrs. Blackwood left strict instructions regarding the door tonight. You are not on the approved registry. You need to leave the premises immediately before we are forced to escort you out." A few nearby guests paused their conversations, pretending not to listen, while leaning closer to witness the public humiliation Chloe had so carefully orchestrated. I did not break my stride, and I did not look down at the clipboard. I looked the guard directly in the eyes. "I am not on the guest list because I am not a guest," I replied smoothly. I reached into Trey's tuxedo jacket pocket and pulled out a heavy gold-plated lanyard. I held it up, letting the polished metal catch the light. "I am a VIP platinum donor." The guard frowned, inspecting the badge. His eyes widened slightly as he recognized the highest tier of sponsorship possible for the evening. Chloe had priced the platinum tables at $50,000 specifically to keep the riffraff out. She never imagined I would buy the center table. "That badge requires verified corporate sponsorship," the guard stammered, looking around nervously. I smiled, a cold, razor-thin expression. "My forensic accounting firm is the primary sponsor tonight. I purchased the table using the exact offshore funds my ex-husband Julian attempted to hide from the federal government. The asset seizure was finalized this morning, and I decided a massive charitable tax deduction was the most productive use of his frozen capital. Now step aside." The guard swallowed hard, unclipped the velvet rope, and stepped back. Trey and I glided past him into the heart of the ballroom. Evelyn was mid-sentence regaling a group of wealthy socialites with another fabricated story about our family's pristine legacy when she finally spotted me. The crystal champagne flute in her hand trembled, sloshing expensive liquid onto her emerald silk dress. She gasped, her hand flying to her chest. Chloe noticed her mother's reaction and whipped her head around. When she saw me walking confidently across her meticulously planned ballroom, her face twisted in absolute fury. She abandoned a group of wealthy donors and marched aggressively across the floor, the heels of her designer shoes clicking furiously against the polished marble. Preston trailed closely behind her, his eyes darting nervously toward the exits. "What are you doing here?" Chloe demanded, stopping inches from my face. Her voice was a venomous hiss. "You are embarrassing this family, Maya. Leave right now or I will call the police." "I am not trespassing, Chloe. I bought the center table. Julian's illegal funds paid for the centerpieces you are standing next to." Evelyn rushed over, flanked by Preston. "Maya, please do not ruin your sister's night." I ignored my mother and turned to Preston. "You have not told them, have you, Preston?" I asked, my voice dripping with amusement. "You have not told your perfect wife how you paid off the Chicago cartel 2 days ago." "Paid off who?" Chloe demanded. Preston opened his mouth but no sound came out. He just stared at my neck. I pulled my hair back, letting the chandeliers illuminate the vintage diamond heirloom necklace. The real one. Evelyn and Chloe looked down. They both physically recoiled in absolute unadulterated terrifying shock. Chloe stared at the flawless diamonds resting against my collarbone. The color rapidly drained from her face, leaving her normally bronze skin a sickly shade of gray. She recognized the intricate platinum setting immediately. It was the undeniable proof that her husband had handed a ruthless crime syndicate a worthless piece of glass. Her chest heaved as she struggled to draw breath. She desperately tried to process the sheer magnitude of her impending public downfall. She looked wildly between the necklace and my calm, steady gaze. The realization of what this meant for her perfect high society life crashed into her. She did not possess the emotional regulation to handle it gracefully. Chloe lunged forward, closing the final few feet between us. Her meticulously manicured fingers curled into tight fists at her sides. "Take that off and get out," she hissed, her voice trembling with unhinged fury. "You are humiliating us, Maya." I did not back away. Instead, I squared my shoulders and raised my chin, allowing the ballroom light to catch the diamonds. I pitched my voice perfectly, ensuring it carried over the soft classical music. I made certain the nearby circle of federal judges and elite vascular surgeons could hear every single syllable clearly. "Humiliating you?" I asked loudly, projecting absolute bewilderment. "I thought you would be happy to see me wearing the necklace Julian tried to steal to pay off Preston's gambling debts." The string quartet seemed to falter, missing a beat before hastily recovering. The conversations at the adjacent VIP tables abruptly ceased. A heavy, suffocating silence radiated outward from our position, rippling through the opulent ballroom. The city's elite society members turned their heads, their eyes wide with poorly concealed predatory curiosity. The pristine facade of the Blackwood and Thornton families had just been violently fractured in front of the very people they desperately sought to impress. Evelyn clutched her pearls, letting out a strangled gasp. She attempted to step forward to block the view of the onlookers, but her legs seemed frozen in place. Julian saw the social disaster unfolding and panicked. He abandoned his polished corporate persona completely. His face contorted in an ugly display of raw desperation and rage. He shoved his way past Preston and lunged at me. "Shut your mouth, Maya," he snarled, aggressively reaching out. His heavy hand clamped down roughly on my bare bicep, his fingers digging painfully into my skin as he tried to drag me toward the exit. He never got the chance to pull. Trey moved with terrifying speed. His tactical training kicked in flawlessly. Before Julian could even register the shift in momentum, Trey stepped directly into Julian's space. Trey's large hand shot out, gripping Julian's wrist like a steel vise. With a sharp, brutal twist, Trey wrenched Julian's arm backward, forcing it high between his shoulder blades. Julian let out a loud, undignified yelp of pain, releasing my arm instantly as his knees buckled under the immense pressure. Trey leaned down, pressing his mouth close to Julian's ear. "Touch my sister again, and I will break it." Trey snarled, his voice a low, lethal rumble that carried a promise of absolute violence. Julian gasped for air, His face flushed red with humiliation and agony. He frantically patted the marble floor with his free hand, a pathetic gesture of submission. Trey held the agonizing joint lock for 3 long seconds, ensuring Julian understood the reality of his situation, before roughly shoving him forward. Julian stumbled, crashing into Preston's chest. Both men flailed awkwardly, struggling to maintain their balance in their expensive tuxedos. The private security guards at the door shifted their weight but did not intervene. They had seen Trey's military precision and my platinum donor badge. They correctly calculated that intervening would cost them their jobs. Evelyn finally found her voice. She plastered a ghastly stretched smile across her face and turned to the stunned crowd of onlookers. "A simple family misunderstanding," Evelyn announced, her voice shrill and trembling. "Just a little sibling rivalry over some borrowed jewelry. Please everyone enjoy the champagne. The vintage is spectacular this year." Nobody looked at the champagne. They were all staring at Preston, who was hyperventilating. His perfectly styled hair was clinging to his sweaty forehead. He realized that the cartel would soon discover his deception, if they had not already. The fake diamonds were a ticking time bomb, and I had just publicly confirmed I possessed the real collateral. He was absolutely trapped now. Preston looked like a man standing on the gallows waiting for the trapdoor to open. Suddenly a loud chime echoed through the ballroom speakers. The grand lighting dimmed slightly, focusing a bright spotlight on the main stage at the front of the room. The event's master of ceremonies, a prominent local news anchor, stepped up to the crystal podium, tapping the microphone with a manicured fingernail. "Ladies and gentlemen," the MC announced, her cheerful voice, oblivious to the carnage that had just unfolded at the back of the room. "Please take your seats. We are so thrilled to welcome you to this wonderful evening of philanthropy. To kick off our program, we have a very special presentation. Please direct your attention to the screens and join me in welcoming our generous host and visionary leader, Mr. Preston Blackwood. He will be delivering tonight's keynote address on the vital importance of generational wealth and corporate integrity." A smattering of polite applause began to fill the room. Preston stood frozen near the velvet rope, looking physically sick. The sheer irony of his impending speech topic hung thickly in the air. He was about to lecture the city's most powerful families on wealth management while secretly drowning in criminal debt. I adjusted my velvet gown and smoothed the diamond necklace resting perfectly against my skin. I turned my head slightly, looking up at my brother. I let a cold, predatory smirk spread across my face. He nodded. "Hit the switch," I whispered to Trey. Preston stumbled up the carpeted steps to the grand stage. He gripped the podium so hard his knuckles turned white. The spotlight highlighted the nervous sweat coating his pale forehead. He looked out over the sea of Chicago's elite. This was the society he and Chloe had desperately clawed to the top of. But tonight, looking out at them, Preston did not see adoring peers. He saw a room full of potential witnesses to his impending demise. The knowledge that he had handed a dangerous Chicago crime syndicate a fake cubic zirconia necklace was eating him alive from the inside out. He knew they were already coming for him, yet he had to stand there and play the role of the generous billionaire host. He cleared his throat, adjusting his silk tie. "Good evening, distinguished guests." Preston began, his voice lacking its usual arrogant mid-Atlantic drawl. It sounded thin and reedy, echoing weakly through the massive ballroom speakers. "Tonight we gather to celebrate a tradition of excellence. We gather to discuss the vital importance of generational wealth and corporate integrity." I stood near the velvet ropes, watching him flounder. Trey stood right beside me, his hand resting casually near his earpiece. The contrast between Preston's crumbling facade and my absolute calm was staggering. For years I had watched this man belittle my career choices, while spending my sister's money and ultimately stealing from my ex-husband's clients. He had paraded his fake Harvard degree around our family dinners, treating me like an uneducated peasant. Now he was up there trying to deliver a keynote address on financial morality, while his entire life burned to the ground. "Building a legacy requires sacrifice," Preston continued, wiping his brow with a linen handkerchief. "It requires a commitment to the community. The funds we raise tonight for the Children's Foundation will ensure that our wealth creates a brighter tomorrow for those less fortunate. It is our duty as leaders, as visionaries, to protect the assets of our community. He attempted a smile, but it looked more like a grimace of physical pain. He kept glancing toward the heavy oak doors at the back of the ballroom, terrified that cartel enforcers were about to burst through them. He rushed through his prepared remarks, skipping entire paragraphs just trying to get off the stage. I looked at Trey and gave a sharp nod. "Do it," I ordered softly. Trey tapped his earpiece twice, murmuring a quick command to his tech team parked in a surveillance van down the street. Instantly, the massive digital screens flanking the stage flickered. The heartwarming slideshow of underprivileged children playing in newly funded parks vanished. The ballroom plunged into a momentary darkness before the screens flared back to life with a blinding white light. The soft string quartet music abruptly cut out, replaced by a sharp digital hum. Preston froze mid-sentence, blinking against the harsh glare behind him. He turned his head slowly. Projected in massive high definition across the 50-foot screens were the highly classified offshore banking ledgers I had painstakingly decrypted over the past 48 hours. There were no children's faces. There were only rows of undeniable financial data. The crowd fell completely silent, staring up at the screens in confusion. Red digital arrows appeared on the projections, moving dynamically across the ledgers. The arrows traced a massive $5 million withdrawal directly from the evening's primary charity fund. The bright red lines snaked across the screen, connecting the foundation's main account to a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands. From there, the arrows pointed directly into a private wealth management account registered exclusively under Preston Blackwood's name. The paper trail was absolute. It was undeniable. It detailed years of systematic embezzlement. The initial confusion in the ballroom rapidly morphed into dawning horror. A collective gasp rippled through the hundreds of seated guests. Silverware clattered loudly against fine china as people dropped their forks in sheer disbelief. Preston stared up at the 50-foot projection of his own grand larceny, his jaw unhinged. He looked like a man watching his own execution. He frantically tapped the microphone. "Please," he stammered, his voice cracking into a high-pitched squeak. "Please remain calm. This is clearly a terrible technical error. We have been hacked. This is a malicious prank by a disgruntled employee. Do not look at the screens." But nobody was looking at Preston. They were reading the itemized transfers. They were seeing their generous charitable donations being funneled into Preston's private accounts, used to cover luxury car leases, country club fees, and massive gambling debts. At the front table, Evelyn let out a high-pitched wail, burying her face in her hands. Her carefully constructed social empire was disintegrating in real time. Chloe sprang from her chair, knocking over a crystal water pitcher. She screamed at the audiovisual technicians in the sound booth, ordering them to cut the power, but the screens remained locked on the damning evidence. Julian took one look at the projected bank statements and quietly tried to slip out the side exit, abandoning his in-laws to their fate. I stepped forward, leaving the shadows of the entrance, and walked purposefully toward a nearby VIP table. The guests at the table stared at me in shock as I reached out and plucked the wireless microphone from its stand. The heavy gold platinum donor badge swung against my chest as I turned to face the room. The microphone fed directly into the ballroom's main sound system, cutting through Preston's pathetic stammering. I raised the microphone to my lips, making sure my voice was crystal clear. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, my words booming across the cavernous space with absolute authority. "Preston Blackwood is not building generational wealth." I gestured toward the glowing screens behind him. "He is stealing yours. Every single dollar you donated tonight went straight into his pocket. This charity is completely broke." The elite crowd erupted into absolute chaos, while federal judges gasped at the digital screens displaying Preston's financial crimes. My mother snapped into her default mode, denial and rage. She shoved past stunned philanthropists, her emerald gown swishing violently. Her face was a mask of pure fury. She marched toward me, her eyes locked onto mine. I stood completely still next to Trey. She raised her hand high, aiming a vicious slap directly at my face. "You spiteful, jealous girl," Evelyn shrieked, her voice cracking. "You forged this to ruin your sister." Before her hand could make contact, I moved. I reached out and caught her wrist mid-air. My grip was iron tight, stopping her momentum. Evelyn gasped, struggling to pull back, but I held her firmly. Her wrist felt fragile, but the malice in her eyes was sharp. "I didn't forge anything, Mother," I said, my voice calm. I stared down into her horrified eyes. "I audit complex financial institutions. I track financial ghosts for a living. I never need to fabricate evidence." I released her wrist, giving her arm a slight push backward. Evelyn stumbled slightly, rubbing her arm. "You have always been obsessed with destroying Chloe," she hissed. "You are humiliating this family over a fabricated spreadsheet. You are a disgrace." I shook my head. "You still do not understand what is happening here, do you? You cannot even read the writing on the projection screen." I signaled Trey. "Next slide." Trey tapped his earpiece. The digital screens behind Preston flickered and shifted. The charity ledgers vanished. A murmur rose from the crowd as a new set of documents materialized. The header on the screen was undeniable. It bore the official crest of Evelyn's wealth management firm. The account numbers were redacted, but the name at the top was broadcast in bold black letters. Evelyn Thornton Retirement Trust. "In fact, you should look at page 4 on the screen," I suggested, gesturing gracefully toward the display. I kept my eyes locked on my mother. "Let us talk about family loyalty, Mother. Let us talk about the man you praise." Evelyn turned her head, following my gesture. Her jaw dropped open. The screen displayed a timeline of wire transfers, a series of massive withdrawals initiated over the past 14 days. The final transfer, dated last Tuesday, showed an outgoing wire of $2.8 million. The remaining balance flashed in bright red ink, $0. "Preston did not just steal from the charity," I announced, my voice echoing cleanly through the microphone. "He needed capital to cover his catastrophic offshore gambling debts. He needed cash to hold off the cartel while he tried to fence a fake necklace. So he accessed your personal accounts. He drained your entire pension last Tuesday. You are bankrupt, Mom." The silence that descended upon the ballroom was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating quiet born of sheer horror. The wealthy elite of Chicago understood money, and they were watching a prominent matriarch realize she had just lost every single penny she owned. Evelyn's breath hitched. She swayed on her feet, her hands flying to her mouth. "No," she whimpered, her voice barely a whisper. "No, that is impossible. Preston manages that trust. He told me the market was shifting. He told me he was moving the funds into municipal bonds." "He lied to you," I stated bluntly, showing no mercy. "He liquidated your entire life savings and wired the cash to a holding company in the Bahamas. From there, it was transferred directly to a syndicate operated out of Chicago's South Side. Your pension paid for his blackjack losses." Evelyn slowly turned her head away from the screen. She looked at Preston, who was still trapped on the main stage, bathed in the harsh spotlight. His tuxedo was completely soaked in sweat. He was breathing heavily, his eyes darting wildly, looking for an escape route that did not exist. "Preston," Evelyn called out, her voice trembling violently. She took a step toward the stage, reaching out with a shaking hand. "Preston, tell her she is lying. Tell them all this is a horrible prank. Tell me my money is safe. Please, Preston." Preston did not answer her. He was hyperventilating, staring at the heavy oak doors at the back of the ballroom. He knew the people he owed money to were not forgiving. They had demanded $5 million. He had given them $2.8 million of Evelyn's cash and a worthless piece of glass. He was a dead man. Evelyn rushed forward, abandoning all decorum. She hiked up the skirt of her emerald silk gown and scrambled up the carpeted steps onto the stage. She grabbed Preston's lapels, shaking him frantically. "Say something," she screamed, tears streaming down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. "Tell them it is a lie." Preston looked down at Evelyn with an expression of absolute disgust. The polished country club gentleman vanished, entirely replaced by a cornered, desperate rat. His survival instinct obliterated any remaining shred of social grace. "Get away from me, you old fool," Preston roared. He shoved Evelyn forcefully in the chest. My mother let out a sharp cry as she stumbled backward, her high heels catching on the carpeted stage. She fell hard, landing awkwardly on her side in front of the entire Chicago elite. The crowd gasped in collective horror. Chloe, who had been standing frozen in shock near the champagne pyramid, suddenly shrieked. She sprinted toward the stage, her face contorted in disbelief and rage. "Preston, what are you doing?" she screamed. Preston glared at Chloe, his lip curling into a vicious sneer. "I am leaving," he snarled, straightening his ruined tuxedo jacket. "You people are pathetic. Do you actually think I wanted to spend my life listening to your mother brag? I only married your daughter for the seed money." Chloe stopped dead in her tracks, looking as if she had been physically struck. Her jaw worked soundlessly. The illusion of her perfect husband shattered into a million irreparable pieces. I stood perfectly still, watching the devastation of the people who had made it their life's mission to break me. The golden child was abandoned. The brilliant son-in-law was exposed as a common thief. The untouchable matriarch was publicly ruined. It was exactly what they deserved. I felt Trey step closer to my side, his presence a solid wall of reassurance. The empire of lies had collapsed. Suddenly a loud, heavy thud echoed from the back of the room. Chloe screamed again. The massive oak doors to the ballroom burst open. 4 men stepped over the threshold, moving with a synchronized, lethal grace that instantly suffocated the remaining murmurs in the room and replaced them with a heavy sense of dread. They did not look like the police or private security. They wore immaculate charcoal suits that cost more than cars, but their posture and movements screamed of localized brutal violence. The lead figure was a man with cold obsidian eyes. A jagged white scar cut sharply through his left eyebrow. He gestured sharply to the 3 massive men behind him. They pulled the heavy brass handles of the doors shut. The loud metallic clack of the deadbolts engaging echoed loudly. It sounded exactly like gunshots ringing through the silent space. The high society crowd was accustomed to absolute unquestioning deference. Now they froze in a state of collective primal terror. Federal judges and elite surgeons suddenly realized their immense status meant absolutely nothing in the face of raw, unfiltered power. The lead enforcer descended the short flight of carpeted steps. He moved directly into the center of the main ballroom. He did not rush or run toward the brightly lit stage, walking with the terrifying leisure of an apex predator. He knew all the exits were definitively and permanently sealed. The sea of emerald silk and bespoke black tuxedos parted. Wealthy philanthropists pressed themselves against the linen-draped banquet tables. They were desperate to avoid making any accidental eye contact. Trey shifted his weight, adjusting his tactical stance very slightly. He placed himself directly between me and the advancing threat. I tapped the back of his wrist, signaling my command. I needed him to hold his ground but not engage. I knew exactly who these dangerous men in suits were. Preston's $5 million deficit had summoned the cartel wolves. They had marched directly into Chloe's perfect elite charity gala. The enforcer stopped at the base of the main stage. He looked up at Preston and Julian with absolute disgust. Preston was visibly shaking uncontrollably under the bright stage lights. His knees knocked together and he gripped the crystal podium. He squeezed the edges so tightly they cut his palms. Julian had frozen mid-step near the emergency side exit. His escape route was permanently severed by another heavy man. Evelyn was still sprawled awkwardly on the carpeted stage floor. She was breathing in shallow, panicked gasps, staring in horror. Chloe stood completely immobilized beside the towering crystal champagne pyramid. The lead enforcer reached into his tailored dark jacket pocket. The sudden movement caused several wealthy guests to flinch backward. They threw their hands up desperately, trying to shield themselves. Instead of a weapon, he pulled out a velvet pouch. He tossed the small black bag casually onto the stage. It landed directly at Preston's feet with a dull thud. The pouch spilled open, revealing the cubic zirconia replica necklace. It gleamed mockingly under the bright beams of the spotlights. "You gave our boss a fake diamond, Mr. Preston Blackwood." The enforcer stated the fact with absolutely zero emotional inflection. His voice was not loud, but it carried lethal authority. It sliced through the silent ballroom like a sharpened blade. Our appraisers took exactly 3 minutes to determine the truth. You handed a Chicago syndicate a worthless piece of glass. You thought you could settle a $5 million debt. We do not appreciate being insulted by cowards, Mr. Blackwood. And we certainly do not appreciate being completely openly defrauded. You made a strict promise to our very powerful organization. You completely failed to deliver on that specific financial promise. Now we are here to collect exactly what is owed. The interest rate on your loan just went up significantly." Preston let out a noise sounding like a whimpering animal. He looked down at the fake stones scattered near him. Then his frantic, desperate gaze snapped directly over to me. His basic survival instinct completely overrode all of his logic. He pointed a shaking, trembling finger directly in my direction. "It was her!" Preston screamed, his voice cracking in desperation. "She did this to us because she is a monster. She is a federal auditor who set us all up. She manipulated the accounts and switched the necklaces on us. She planned this entire thing just to ruin our lives. Take her because she is the one you actually want. She has the real diamonds right there on her neck. Do not touch me, but grab her and take them." Julian suddenly moved, breaking out of his terrified, frozen state. The sheer panic spurred him into blind and chaotic action. He lunged forward, grabbing my left arm with rough hands. His fingers dug deeply and painfully into my bare skin. "Tell them," Julian yelled with thick spit flying from lips. "Tell them you orchestrated this entire situation from the beginning." Before I could even react, Trey moved with blinding speed. Trey immediately moved forward, letting his intense tactical training lead. He swatted Julian's hand away and grabbed his right wrist. He twisted Julian's arm violently and firmly behind his back. Julian shrieked loudly, dropping to his knees on the marble. "Touch my sister again and I will permanently break it." Trey snarled, his voice echoing off the high painted ceiling. Julian whimpered in extreme pain, nodding his head very frantically. The lead enforcer watched the entire exchange without moving once. He kept his cold, dead eyes firmly fixed on Preston. He watched the pathetic display of a supposed wealthy billionaire. A low, gravelly chuckle finally rumbled in the enforcer's chest. He slowly turned his head to assess my velvet gown. He looked back at Preston, shaking his head in disgust. "Her?" the enforcer asked, his voice dripping with heavy condescension. "No, we do not operate on whims of angry sisters. We received a direct tip from the actual real owner." The crowd parted as my father Marcus stepped boldly forward. He stared at Preston with a look of absolute fury. Marcus walked down the center aisle of the ballroom. His footsteps broke the heavy silence beside Evelyn weeping on the floor. The wealthy philanthropist shrank back against the banquet tables, terrified of the men in suits. They were equally stunned by my father's sudden appearance. Chloe remained paralyzed by the champagne pyramid, her hands trembling. Marcus ignored his ex-wife. He kept his eyes locked onto Preston and Julian. Both men looked like trapped animals. Julian was still on his knees, whimpering under Trey's iron grip. Preston stood shivering near the scattered cubic zirconia stones, stripped of his arrogant persona. "You thought you were the smartest men in Chicago," Marcus said, his voice resonating with lethal power. "You thought you could manipulate this family and steal everything we built. You thought Maya was an easy target." Julian struggled against Trey's hold. "Marcus, what are you talking about?" Julian gasped. "We are family. You gave me that necklace as a gift for Chloe." Marcus let out a harsh laugh. He reached into his jacket, pulling out a thick stack of medical files. He tossed them onto the marble floor, stopping inches from Preston's shoes. "I found out 6 months ago that I have terminal pancreatic cancer," Marcus announced bluntly. The crowd let out a collective gasp. Evelyn stopped weeping and stared up at him. "I was given less than a year to live," Marcus continued. "I spent the first month getting my affairs in order, ensuring my real daughter was protected. That was when my accountants uncovered your digital fingerprints, Julian." Julian went completely rigid. Trey increased the pressure on his wrist, forcing another yelp from his throat. "You thought you covered your tracks brilliantly," Marcus stated, pacing across the room. "But you are both sloppy, arrogant fools. I found the shell companies. I found the falsified loan applications. I found the emails detailing your master plan to frame Maya for your financial crimes. You wanted to use her pristine credit score and her auditing credentials as a shield. You were going to drain her assets and leave her holding the bag for your offshore embezzlement. You thought when I died she would be alone and vulnerable to your theft." Preston frantically shook his head, backing away, until he hit the edge of the stage. "Marcus, you have it all wrong," Preston pleaded. "It was Julian. Julian forced me to use the charity accounts. He owed money to the wrong people." Julian twisted his head to glare at Preston. "You coward!" Julian spat. You lost the money at the tables. You told me the cartel would kill us both if I did not help you steal from the foundation." The lead enforcer watched the two men turn on each other with amusement. He adjusted his cuffs, waiting patiently for Marcus to finish his execution. "I gave you the necklace to force your hand," Julian, Marcus said, stopping directly in front of him. "I knew you were desperate for liquid capital. I knew you would steal the diamonds the second I handed you the vault code. I knew Preston would fence it to the cartel to buy time. I set the trap to protect my real daughter." Evelyn finally found her voice. She pulled herself up onto her knees, her gown stained. "Marcus, you cannot do this," she cried, reaching out toward him. "They are your family. Chloe is your daughter too. You are handing them over to criminals." Marcus looked down at Evelyn with icy disdain. "Chloe ceased being my daughter the day she helped these parasites try to destroy Maya," he replied. "You chose your legacy of lies, Evelyn. You chose the country club facade over actual family. Now you get to watch it burn. You are completely bankrupt. Your golden son-in-law is a thief. Your favorite daughter is married to a traitor. You have absolutely nothing left." Evelyn collapsed backward, sobbing uncontrollably into her hands. The brutal reality of her complete financial and social ruin finally crushed her remaining delusions. Marcus turned his attention back to the cartel enforcer. He stood tall, ignoring the pain ravaging his failing body. He looked the dangerous man squarely in the eye. The Chicago elite watched in stunned silence as a dying father negotiated with a syndicate killer. "The real diamonds are secured in a private vault," Marcus stated evenly. "The coordinates and access codes were transferred to your employer 20 minutes ago. The debt is paid in full. We have no further business." The lead enforcer reached into his pocket and pulled out an encrypted satellite phone. He glanced at the screen, reading a brief text message. A slow, cold smile spread across his scarred face. He slipped the phone back into his jacket and gave Marcus a sharp, respectful nod. "Our debt is settled, old man," the enforcer agreed, his gravelly voice carrying across the silent ballroom. "The money is good. You are a man of your word." The enforcer then turned his dead obsidian eyes toward Preston and Julian. The smile vanished entirely, replaced by a mask of professional violence. He gestured to the three massive men standing by the doors. "But these two are coming with us," the enforcer announced, pointing a gloved finger at the cowering men. "They insulted our organization. They tried to pass off fake collateral. That requires a different kind of payment. Grab them." Preston screamed, scrambling backward onto the stage. Julian thrashed wildly, trying to break free from Trey. Trey shoved Julian forward, sending him crashing to the floor at the feet of the enforcer. Two large men moved with terrifying speed, grabbing Preston, dragging him off the stage. Preston kicked, begging for mercy that did not exist. Julian sobbed as the third man hauled him up by his collar. The wealthy guest scrambled backward, trying to escape the violence. Suddenly, police sirens wailed relentlessly outside the main building. The entire hotel was completely surrounded. The trap was now finally fully set. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated the high-arched windows of the grand ballroom, casting chaotic shadows across the terrified faces of the elite guests. Heavy combat boots pounded against the pristine marble floors of the foyer. The thick oak doors that the cartel enforcers had just locked were violently breached from the outside. Wood splintered and hinges shattered as heavily armed FBI agents swarmed into the cavernous space. They moved with military precision, fanning out across the perimeter and cutting off every single avenue of escape. Tactical rifles were raised, and authoritative voices barked commands over the screaming crowd. The sudden, overwhelming presence of federal law enforcement broke the remaining sanity in the room. Wealthy socialites dropped to the floor, clutching their diamond necklaces and covering their heads in absolute panic. The elite string quartet members abandoned their expensive cellos and violins, scrambling beneath the banquet tables. Marcus stood completely unbothered by the tactical teams flooding the room. He looked at the lead cartel enforcer, giving a slight nod toward the service corridor. The scarred man returned the gesture, slipping backward into the shadows with his crew, just as the federal agents surged forward. They were not here for the Chicago syndicate today. They had a very specific target. Marcus turned back to Preston and Julian, his expression devoid of any mercy. You thought I only called the men you owed money to? Marcus said, his voice cutting through the noise. I am a dying man, but I am also a patriot. I took every single forensic audit file Maya painstakingly assembled and handed it directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Every offshore account, every dummy corporation, every fake appraisal document is currently sitting on a federal prosecutor's desk. Your entire criminal enterprise has been completely dismantled. Preston realized the terrifying finality of his situation. The cartel wanted his blood, but the federal government was about to take away his freedom, his assets, and his entire identity. He looked at the agents closing in on the stage, and his self-preservation instinct short-circuited his brain. He bolted. Preston lunged sideways, knocking over a crystal champagne fountain. Glass shattered and expensive liquor flooded the stage. He scrambled toward the heavy velvet curtains, masking the backstage area, hoping to find a service stairwell. He did not make it 3 steps. 2 massive FBI agents tackled him simultaneously. They hit Preston with the force of a freight train, driving his shoulder violently into the hard, polished floor. Preston let out a muffled scream as they pinned him down, roughly twisting his arms behind his back. The sharp metallic click of heavy handcuffs snapping shut echoed loudly over the chaotic din of the panicked ballroom. Julian watched his partner in crime get brutally restrained and lost his mind completely. He realized he was no longer a respected wealth manager. He was a federal criminal facing decades in a maximum security penitentiary. Julian dropped heavily to his knees on the marble floor, abandoning all dignity. He crawled desperately toward me, ignoring the federal agents rushing into the center of the room. He clasped his hands together in front of his chest. Tears streamed freely down his flushed cheeks, snot bubbling from his nose. Maya, please, Julian begged, his voice a pathetic, high-pitched whine. Please tell them I had nothing to do with the embezzlement. Tell them Preston forced me into it. You know I am a good man, Maya. We used to be family. You know I would never intentionally hurt anyone. Tell them I am innocent. Please, I am begging you on my hands and knees. I looked down at the man who had actively plotted to ruin my life and steal my hard-earned assets. He was trembling violently, a puddle of tears and sweat staining the expensive marble beneath him. I felt no pity. I felt absolutely nothing for him. I smoothed the velvet fabric of my gown and met his terrified gaze. Take your tears and leave now, I said, my voice perfectly steady and ice cold. My brother is waiting to drive me home. Julian gasped as if I had physically struck him. 2 FBI agents grabbed him by the armpits, hauling his dead weight off the floor. They slammed him against the edge of a banquet table, expertly frisking him before snapping handcuffs onto his wrists. He sobbed uncontrollably as they marched him toward the shattered main entrance, joining Preston, who was being dragged away by his collar. The crowd watched the 2 supposedly brilliant financial minds being paraded out like common street thugs. The mighty Blackwood and Thornton alliance was officially dead. As the agents hauled them past the VIP tables, Chloe suddenly snapped out of her paralyzed state. She lunged forward, her manicured hands grasping wildly. She did not reach for her husband. She reached directly for me. Her fingers clamped onto the velvet fabric of my dress, gripping the material with desperate, frantic strength. Her perfect hair was wild, her mascara smudged from crying. Please, Maya, Chloe shrieked, her voice echoing with raw panic. I have nothing. He took everything from me. All the accounts are frozen. The house is gone. My mother is completely bankrupt. You have to help me, Maya. You are my sister. You cannot just leave me here with absolutely nothing. Please tell them to give me my money back. I looked down at Chloe's frantic, grasping hands. I remembered all the years of her cruel taunts. I remembered her mocking my career and wearing the necklace that was meant to destroy me. I reached down and firmly detached Chloe's hands from my dress, peeling her fingers back one by one. The bright flash of cameras from local news journalists gathered at the perimeter began illuminating the ruined room. I stepped back, allowing a federal agent to step between us. You always wanted to be the center of attention, Chloe, I said smoothly. Smile for the mugshots. The chaotic symphony of wailing sirens and shouting federal agents gradually faded into a stark, hollow quiet. The grand ballroom, once a dazzling spectacle of Chicago elite society, now looked like the aftermath of a localized hurricane. The wealthy philanthropists and federal judges had fled the scene like frightened mice, abandoning their half-empty crystal champagne flutes and bespoke jackets in their desperate rush for the exits. The sea of emerald silk was replaced by the harsh, sterile yellow tape of crime scene investigators. Uniformed officers and plainclothes forensic accountants swarmed the linen-draped banquet tables, meticulously bagging scattered documents and the cubic zirconia necklace. The flashing blue and red lights from the cruisers outside cast long erratic shadows against the high arched windows. The absolute decimation of the Blackwood and Thornton dynasties was complete. I stood near the center of the room, watching the meticulous federal takedown of everything my mother had worshipped. The air smelled of spilled expensive liquor and raw fear. I turned my attention away from the shattered champagne pyramid and looked toward the far corner of the ruined ballroom. Evelyn sat completely alone at a partially collapsed table. Her perfect posture had entirely dissolved. She was slumped forward in a chair that cost more than most people made in a month, muttering feverishly to herself. She picked up a shattered piece of crystal from the floor and rubbed it between her trembling fingers. Her expensive mascara was smeared down her pale cheeks in dark, jagged lines. I walked slowly across the debris-strewn carpet, my heels crunching on broken glass. I stopped directly across the table from her. Evelyn looked up, her eyes darting around the empty room before finally locking onto my face. For a fleeting second I thought I saw genuine remorse. I thought the utter destruction of her carefully curated world might have finally broken through her profound narcissism. I was entirely wrong. Her expression quickly morphed from terror into desperate calculating entitlement. "Maya, you have to help us," Evelyn whispered, her voice hoarse and frantic. "The federal agents are seizing the estate. They are locking down the trust funds. Chloe has absolutely nothing left and my accounts are completely frozen. The country club board is already texting me about a suspension. It is an absolute nightmare, Maya. You have to let me and Chloe move in with you. We are family. You have that massive penthouse downtown and plenty of room. We can figure this out together." I stared down at the woman who gave birth to me. She was not grieving the arrest of her son-in-law. She was not mourning the terminal diagnosis of her former husband. She was actively mourning her lost country club membership and her severed access to luxury. She expected me to simply absorb her failure and fund her delusions after she actively facilitated my attempted ruin. The sheer audacity was staggering, but no longer surprising. I felt a profound sense of closure wash over me. The invisible chains of childhood obligation finally snapped. Family does not serve their daughter to wolves to protect a country club membership. I stated, my voice echoing with icy finality in the quiet room. You sat there and watched Preston and Julian try to frame me for federal crimes. You knew exactly what they were doing, and you chose your precious social standing over my actual life. You sold me out for a seat at the elite table, Evelyn. Now that table is completely smashed. You made your choice years ago. You are on your own. Evelyn recoiled as if she had been physically slapped. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The harsh reality of her isolation finally registered in her wide, panicked eyes. I did not wait for her to formulate another manipulative excuse. I turned my back on her and walked away, leaving her sitting in the ruins of her own catastrophic vanity. I moved toward the grand foyer, where Trey was quietly giving his statement to a federal agent. Before I could reach the heavy oak doors, I heard a slow, shuffling footstep behind me. I turned to see Marcus approaching. The adrenaline that had fueled his commanding performance earlier was completely gone. He looked incredibly frail, his tailored suit hanging loosely on his thinning frame. The terminal cancer was actively claiming him, but his face held a profound serenity I had never seen before. The perpetual storm of corporate ruthlessness had vanished from his eyes. He looked entirely peaceful. "You did well tonight," Maya, Marcus said, his voice a low, raspy whisper. "You stood your ground against the worst kind of predators. I always knew you had the strength to survive them. I just wish I had recognized it sooner." I wish I had been the father you actually deserved instead of the executive I chose to be. I looked at the dying man who had just orchestrated his own financial and social crucifixion to save my life. He had weaponized his impending death to destroy the parasites feeding on our legacy. You saved me tonight, I replied quietly. You gave up your entire reputation to ensure I was safe. That counts for something. Marcus offered a small, weak smile. It counts for a clean slate, he murmured. He reached inside the breast pocket of his jacket. His hand trembled slightly as he pulled out a heavy sealed manila envelope. He held it out to me. The paper was thick and unmarked. I have one last thing to give you, Marcus said, pressing the envelope firmly into my hands. The estate is gone and the corporate assets are seized, but my real legacy is not tied up in federal holds. I made sure of that months ago. Do not open it here today. Take it home now. Read it when the dust settles. He patted my hands gently, his touch cold but reassuring. I looked down at the heavy envelope, feeling the literal weight of my father's final act of protection. The dust did eventually settle, but it took 3 grueling months of absolute chaos to clear the air. The fallout from the charity was catastrophic and spectacular. The Chicago media relentlessly devoured the scandal, plastering the Blackwood and Thornton names across every front page and evening news broadcast. Camera crews camped outside the hotel and federal courthouses, hungry for any detail of the elite syndicate. The brilliant financial empires they had paraded around the country club were exposed as hollow, fraudulent shells. Julian and Preston did not even try to fight the federal indictments. The forensic audit files I had compiled were too thorough, and the FBI had them dead to rights on wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. They stood before a federal judge looking completely broken, their expensive tailored suits replaced by standard-issue orange jumpsuits. They both pled guilty to avoid a drawn-out public trial, hoping for leniency that never came. They were currently sitting in federal holding facilities awaiting transfers to maximum security prisons, where they would each serve a minimum of 20 years. Marcus passed away quietly just 2 weeks after the gala. He died on his own terms, looking out at the city skyline, knowing he had permanently neutralized the threats against me. The contents of that heavy manila envelope changed the entire trajectory of my life, but it completely obliterated whatever fragile remnants of privilege Evelyn and Chloe still possessed. The federal government moved with swift, merciless precision, seizing assets to cover the massive debts Preston had incurred with the cartel and the money he had stolen from the foundation. Nothing was off limits. Everything connected to their fraudulent wealth was systematically dismantled and auctioned off to the highest bidder. That included the ancestral family mansion. The sprawling stone estate had been Evelyn's absolute pride and joy for 3 decades. It was the physical manifestation of her social superiority and the primary venue for her elite gatherings. Now it was just another foreclosed property on the bank's ledger. I parked down the street, watching the final eviction play out on the pristine, manicured lawn. The morning air was crisp and biting, carrying the scent of impending winter. 2 stern bank representatives wearing cheap off-the-rack suits and holding heavy clipboards stood on the grand marble portico. A local sheriff's deputy stood nearby, his arms crossed over his chest, ensuring the eviction proceeded without any violent interruptions. Evelyn and Chloe were completely unrecognizable from the women who had sneered at me in the ballroom 3 months ago. They were stripped of their custom silk gowns, their diamond tennis bracelets, and their flawless blowouts. Evelyn wore a faded gray tracksuit, her hair tied back in a messy knot. She sat on an overturned cardboard box, sobbing hysterically into her hands, rocking back and forth. Chloe was frantically shoving a haphazard pile of basic clothing into a scuffed vinyl suitcase. The federal asset forfeiture had claimed their designer wardrobes, their luxury vehicles, and their offshore safety nets. They had been reduced to the absolute bare minimum allowed by law. The humiliation was visceral and entirely public. Several former country club neighbors had intentionally walked their purebred dogs past the wrought iron gates, whispering and pointing at the spectacular downfall of the neighborhood matriarch. The bank representative stepped forward, holding a heavy industrial chain. He pulled the grand custom mahogany doors shut. The loud metallic clack of the heavy steel padlock snapping into place echoed across the sprawling lawn. It sounded exactly like the deadbolts the cartel enforcer had used at the gala. Evelyn flinched violently at the sound, letting out a sharp wailing cry. Her ancestral home, her final piece of leverage and status, was officially gone forever. Evelyn had spent decades curating an image of untouchable perfection. She had ruthlessly judged every other woman in her social circle, destroying reputations over minor faux pas or perceived financial weaknesses. She was now a cautionary tale. The people she had terrorized for years were enjoying her complete destruction. The board of directors at the country club had not just suspended her membership, they had issued a lifetime ban. The prestigious charity committees she once chaired had scrubbed her name from all their programs. The silence from her friends was absolutely deafening. I signaled my driver. The sleek black Maybach glided silently away from the curb and turned onto the long, winding driveway of the estate. The heavy tires crunched softly against the loose gravel, drawing the immediate attention of the bank representatives, the deputy, and the two weeping women on the grass. The heavily tinted windows shielded my identity until the massive vehicle came to a smooth halt just inches from the pile of cheap luggage. My driver stepped out quickly, circling the front of the car to open my door. I stepped out onto the driveway. I wore a sharply tailored charcoal power suit, the fabric crisp and immaculate. The jacket was tailored to perfection, emphasizing my absolute control over my environment. My posture was straight, my gaze completely steady. I was no longer the discarded daughter seeking validation. I was the architect of my own survival and the executor of my father's true legacy. The sheer contrast between my arrival and their desperate eviction was staggering. Chloe dropped a handful of wrinkled shirts onto the wet grass. Her eyes went wide, taking in the Maybach, the professional driver, and my pristine suit. She scrambled to her feet, abandoning her cheap suitcase entirely. She sprinted across the lawn, her worn sneakers slipping on the damp grass. She stopped mere feet from me, her chest heaving. Her face was pale, her eyes bloodshot and desperate. She reached out her hands, trembling violently in the cold air. "Did you come to gloat?" Chloe demanded, her voice cracking with raw, desperate panic. "Or did you come to help us?" Chloe stood trembling on the damp grass. I looked at her tear-stained face, then at the pathetic pile of belongings scattered at her feet. She was shivering, waiting for my answer. I did not smile, I did not frown. I simply observed her with the clinical detachment of an auditor reviewing a bankrupt ledger. I came to do neither. "Chloe," I stated, my voice carrying easily over the sound of the wind rustling through the ancient oak trees. "I came to close an account." I unbuttoned my tailored suit jacket with deliberate slowness. I reached into the interior pocket and withdrew the heavy manila envelope Marcus had pressed into my hands 3 months ago on the night of the gala. The paper felt thick and substantial, carrying the weight of ultimate finality. I held it out toward her. Chloe hesitated, her eyes darting between my face and the envelope. She slowly reached out her fingers, brushing mine as she took it. She fumbled with the seal, tearing the thick paper in her frantic haste. She pulled out a stack of crisp legal documents bearing the embossed seal of the county clerk. Evelyn scrambled up from her overturned cardboard box, her sudden movement startling the nearby bank representatives. She shoved her way past Chloe, snatching the papers directly out of her daughter's hands. Evelyn's eyes scanned the complex legal jargon darting frantically across the page until they landed on the bold print at the very top. It was the official property deed to the sprawling stone mansion standing proudly behind us. My name was listed clearly and indisputably as the sole owner of the entire ancestral estate. A miraculous transformation washed over Evelyn's face. The harsh lines of terror and exhaustion completely vanished, instantly replaced by a mask of overwhelming manufactured maternal affection. Her eyes lit up with a sudden greedy brilliance. She clutched the deed to her chest as if it were a life preserver. "You bought the house back for us," Evelyn gasped, letting out a breathless, triumphant laugh. "Oh, Maya, I knew you loved your mother." She took a step toward me, opening her arms as if to embrace the daughter she had spent decades actively destroying. "I always knew you had a good heart, Maya. I knew you would never abandon your real family despite everything that happened with Preston and Julian. You saved our ancestral home. We can move our things back inside right now. I will call the bank manager and tell him to remove that dreadful padlock immediately. We can put this whole ugly mess behind us and start over together." I did not step back. I stood my ground, letting her desperate, delusional joy fill the cold morning air for one more fleeting second before I crushed it entirely. I looked at the grand stone pillars of the mansion, the pristine driveway, the perfectly trimmed hedges that had represented my mother's ultimate triumph over everyone she considered beneath her. Then I looked back into her grasping, greedy eyes. "I bought the house." "Yes," I replied, my voice dropping to a dangerous quiet register that stopped her dead in her tracks. Her arms slowly fell to her sides. "But I did not buy it for you, Evelyn." The fake smile froze on her face, slowly fracturing as absolute confusion and a new profound terror seeped into her widened eyes. Chloe let out a small terrified whimper, backing away from her mother and staring at me with wide, unblinking panic. The bank representatives watched the exchange in absolute silence, gripping their heavy clipboards tightly. "I bought it because this specific parcel of land is zoned for commercial use," I explained, watching the absolute horror finally dawn on their pale faces. "The Architectural Preservation Board approved my demolition permits yesterday afternoon. I am bulldozing it tomorrow morning to build the new headquarters for my accounting firm." Evelyn let out a guttural, choked sound, dropping the deed onto the wet grass as if it had suddenly caught fire. The crisp white paper landed next to a discarded pair of cheap sneakers. She stared at the massive stone columns of her ancestral mansion, finally realizing that the physical monument to her vanity was about to be reduced to rubble and a paved parking lot. The exclusive estate she had lorded over the city for 30 years would become the foundation of the very career she had relentlessly mocked. "You cannot do this!" Evelyn shrieked, her voice shattering the quiet neighborhood. "It is our legacy. It is our history. You are destroying everything we built." I stepped forward, closing the distance between us. I looked at the two women who had made my entire existence a living hell. I remembered the charity galas where I was shoved into the shadows. I remembered the fake cubic zirconia necklace meant to send me to federal prison. I remembered every single slight, every insult, every calculated attempt to break my spirit and steal my future. I felt absolutely no anger anymore. I felt only the profound, deep peace of a perfectly balanced ledger. The accounts were finally settled. "You told me I wasn't fit for your table," I said, delivering the final devastating blow. My words cut through the crisp autumn air with lethal precision, echoing off the stone facade of the doomed mansion. I held Evelyn's gaze, refusing to let her look away from the reality of her complete and utter destruction. "So I bought the whole damn restaurant. Pack your bags. Failures don't belong on my property." I turned away from their hysterical sobbing without another backward glance. I walked steadily across the gravel driveway toward the waiting Maybach. My driver held the door open respectfully, and I slid into the luxurious leather interior. The heavy door clicked shut, instantly silencing their desperate wails. The sleek car glided smoothly away from the curb, leaving them kneeling forever in the dirt of their ruined past, as I drove forward today. The drive from the shattered remains of my mother's vanity project to the serene isolation of the hospice care facility took less than 40 minutes. The transition between the two worlds was jarring. I stepped out of the Maybach and walked into the sterile quiet of the medical center, holding the heavy manila envelope Marcus had given me 3 months ago. The nurses at the front desk nodded respectfully, waving me through to the private wing. Marcus had spared absolutely no expense for his final days, securing a quiet corner suite that looked more like a luxury apartment than a hospital room. Large floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping view of the restless gray ocean. I pushed the heavy oak door open and stepped inside. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and expensive linen. The relentless hum of medical monitors provided a steady, rhythmic heartbeat to the otherwise silent space. Trey sat in a high-backed leather chair pulled close to the bed. He was leaning forward, holding our father's pale, frail hand between his own. Trey looked up as I entered, giving me a silent nod. His eyes were red-rimmed but steady. He had spent the last 3 months standing by Marcus, absorbing the reality of our bizarre, fractured family dynamic and finding a strange, hard-won peace with the man who had ultimately sacrificed himself for us. Marcus lay propped up against a mountain of white pillows. He looked completely translucent, his skin pulled tight over his cheekbones, the aggressive cancer having consumed almost everything physical left of him. But his eyes were clear. They tracked my movement across the room, holding a spark of the old, formidable corporate titan he had once been. He saw the heavy manila envelope clutched in my hands, and a faint, knowing smile touched his cracked lips. "You brought it," Marcus whispered, his voice barely a rasp over the sound of the oxygen machine. "I was beginning to wonder if you were ever going to open that." "I had been waiting for the right moment," I replied, pulling a chair up to the opposite side of the bed. "I wanted to make sure Evelyn and Chloe were completely neutralized before I focused on whatever you left me. I just came from the estate. The bank officially locked them out this morning. The foreclosure is complete and the demolition crew arrives tomorrow at dawn." Marcus let out a soft breath that might have been a laugh. He closed his eyes for a moment, savoring the absolute finality of my statement. He turned his head slightly toward Trey, then back to me. "Open it, Maya," he commanded softly. "Let us finish this while I am still here to see it." I slid my manicured thumbnail under the thick seal of the envelope and tore it open. The heavy paper gave way, revealing a small stack of documents. I pulled them out, resting them on my lap. The first item was a handwritten letter penned in Marcus's sharp, aggressive scrawl. Beneath the letter sat a series of complex international banking documents. They bore the watermark of a highly exclusive private Swiss bank, an institution known for absolute discretion and impenetrable security. Attached to the banking folios was a small laminated black card printed with a sequence of alphanumeric access codes and routing numbers. I scanned the documents, trying to comprehend the dense financial jargon. I looked up at Marcus, completely bewildered. "What is this?" I asked, holding up the black card. Trey leaned over, looking at the paperwork in my lap. His brow furrowed in confusion as he recognized the foreign banking seals. He realized what this represented long before I did. The sheer magnitude of the elaborate financial architecture was completely staggering. This was not just a simple trust fund or a hidden savings account. This was a massive, meticulously constructed fortress, designed to withstand federal audits, cartel investigations, and Evelyn's relentless, insatiable greed. Marcus coughed weakly, and Trey quickly offered him a sip of water from a small sponge. Marcus swallowed hard and continued, his gaze locking onto mine with fierce intensity. "I knew Evelyn would eventually destroy everything she touched," Marcus rasped. "I knew her vanity and Chloe's greed would inevitably invite parasites like Preston and Julian into our lives. I saw the rot spreading years ago, so I started siphoning off the actual profits from my private ventures. I channeled the money through dozens of shell corporations, completely bypassing the domestic accounts Evelyn had access to. I funneled every single clean, untraceable dollar directly into that Swiss account." I looked down at the balance printed on the final page of the folio. The number was so staggering my breath caught in my throat. It was completely clean. It was fully taxed. It was structured through impenetrable offshore trusts, and it was absolutely untouchable by the federal government or any bankruptcy court. I looked at Trey, who was staring at our father in absolute shock. Marcus squeezed Trey's hand with whatever remaining strength he possessed. "I was a terrible father to you both," Marcus continued, tears finally pooling in the corners of his sunken eyes. "I allowed Evelyn to exile you, Trey. I allowed her to treat you like a second-class citizen, Maya. I justified my cowardice by telling myself I was protecting the corporate empire. But the empire was just money. You two were my actual legacy. I realized that too late." He took a ragged, trembling breath. The monitor beside the bed began to chime with a faster, urgent rhythm. "I cannot undo the past," Maya. Marcus gasped, his voice fading into a barely audible thin whisper. "I spent my life letting your mother prioritize status over substance," Marcus whispers. "But I built my real wealth in the shadows. $50 million, Maya. It is yours and Trey's. Build an empire they can never touch." Marcus passes away peacefully, knowing he finally protected his true children. The drive from the shattered remains of my mother's vanity project to the serene isolation of the hospice care facility took less than 40 minutes. The transition between the two worlds was jarring. I stepped out of the Maybach and walked into the sterile quiet of the medical center, holding the heavy manila envelope Marcus had given me 3 months ago. The nurses at the front desk nodded respectfully, waving me through to the private wing. Marcus had spared absolutely no expense for his final days, securing a quiet corner suite that looked more like a luxury apartment than a hospital room. Large floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping view of the restless gray ocean. I pushed the heavy oak door open and stepped inside. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and expensive linen. The relentless hum of medical monitors provided a steady rhythmic heartbeat to the otherwise silent space. Trey sat in a high-backed leather chair pulled close to the bed. He was leaning forward, holding our father's pale, frail hand between his own. Trey looked up as I entered, giving me a silent nod. His eyes were red-rimmed but steady. He had spent the last 3 months standing by Marcus, absorbing the reality of our bizarre, fractured family dynamic, and finding a strange, hard-won peace with the man who had ultimately sacrificed himself for us. Marcus lay propped up against a mountain of white pillows. He looked completely translucent, his skin pulled tight over his cheekbones, the aggressive cancer having consumed almost everything physical left of him. But his eyes were clear. They tracked my movement across the room, holding a spark of the old, formidable corporate titan he had once been. He saw the heavy manila envelope clutched in my hands, and a faint, knowing smile touched his cracked lips. "You brought it," Marcus whispered, his voice barely a rasp over the sound of the oxygen machine. "I was beginning to wonder if you were ever going to open that." "I had been waiting for the right moment," I replied, pulling a chair up to the opposite side of the bed. "I wanted to make sure Evelyn and Chloe were completely neutralized before I focused on whatever you left me. I just came from the estate. The bank officially locked them out this morning. The foreclosure is complete and the demolition crew arrives tomorrow at dawn." Marcus let out a soft breath that might have been a laugh. He closed his eyes for a moment, savoring the absolute finality of my statement. He turned his head slightly toward Trey, then back to me. "Open it, Maya," he commanded softly. "Let us finish this while I am still here to see it." I slid my manicured thumbnail under the thick seal of the envelope and tore it open. The heavy paper gave way, revealing a small stack of documents. I pulled them out, resting them on my lap. The first item was a handwritten letter penned in Marcus's sharp, aggressive scrawl. Beneath the letter sat a series of complex international banking documents. They bore the watermark of a highly exclusive private Swiss bank, an institution known for absolute discretion and impenetrable security. Attached to the banking folios was a small laminated black card, printed with a sequence of alphanumeric access codes and routing numbers. I scanned the documents, trying to comprehend the dense financial jargon. I looked up at Marcus, completely bewildered. "What is this?" I asked, holding up the black card. Trey leaned over, looking at the paperwork in my lap. His brow furrowed in confusion as he recognized the foreign banking seals. He realized what this represented long before I did. The sheer magnitude of the elaborate financial architecture was completely staggering. This was not just a simple trust fund or a hidden savings account. This was a massive, meticulously constructed fortress designed to withstand federal audits, cartel investigations, and Evelyn's relentless, insatiable greed. Marcus coughed weakly, and Trey quickly offered him a sip of water from a small sponge. Marcus swallowed hard and continued his gaze, locking onto mine with fierce intensity. "I knew Evelyn would eventually destroy everything she touched," Marcus rasped. "I knew her vanity and Chloe's greed would inevitably invite parasites like Preston and Julian into our lives. I saw the rot spreading years ago, so I started siphoning off the actual profits from my private ventures. I channeled the money through dozens of shell corporations, completely bypassing the domestic accounts Evelyn had access to. I funneled every single clean, untraceable dollar directly into that Swiss account." I looked down at the balance printed on the final page of the folio. The number was so staggering my breath caught in my throat. It was completely clean. It was fully taxed. It was structured through impenetrable offshore trusts. and it was absolutely untouchable by the federal government or any bankruptcy court. I looked at Trey, who was staring at our father in absolute shock. Marcus squeezed Trey's hand with whatever remaining strength he possessed. "I was a terrible father to you both," Marcus continued, tears finally pooling in the corners of his sunken eyes. "I allowed Evelyn to exile you, Trey. I allowed her to treat you like a second-class citizen, Maya. I justified my cowardice by telling myself I was protecting the corporate empire. But the empire was just money. You two were my actual legacy. I realized that too late." He took a ragged, trembling breath. The monitor beside the bed began to chime with a faster, urgent rhythm. "I cannot undo the past." Maya, Marcus gasped, his voice fading into a barely audible thin whisper. "I spent my life letting your mother prioritize status over substance," Marcus whispers. "But I built my real wealth in the shadows. $50 million now, Maya. It is yours and Trey's. Build an empire they can never touch." Marcus passes away peacefully, knowing he finally protected his true children. The story of Maya powerfully illustrates that our true worth is never defined by the toxic families we are born into, but by the resilience we cultivate. Maya endured years of emotional abuse, constantly dismissed by a mother who valued superficial status over genuine connection. Yet she silently built her own foundation of success. The ultimate lesson here is that the best revenge is not found in anger, but in achieving unassailable independence. We must recognize that walking away from toxic environments is not a failure, but a triumph. Reclaim your narrative today and start building your own untouchable empire,